The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Delegate Kory with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.
Well, I wanted to congratulate you on being a recipient of the Michael S. Harris Award from the Virginia chapter of the American Association of University Professors. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a remarkable organization that really looks at higher education from a very wide perspective. It's not only curriculum or tenure for professors. They're very interested in academic freedom, in access to higher ed for students. And I am so honored and shocked that, anyway, it was very important, and the award is really nice looking too, and it's on my wall.
Great, well deserved. And I know it relates to some legislation that you pursued last year and continuing to pursue.
Yes, you mean the in-state tuition for
Yes.
DACA students.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that's been years now that I've been working on that. And the reason why it's important to have a bill in this session about the in-state tuition is because the in-state tuition decree that the Attorney General made is in effect, so all DACA students have in-state tuition in Virginia now, but if that Attorney General does not return, then that can easily be dropped. And my efforts now are to have that in-state tuition put into the code so we don't have to worry year by year. And there will also be a number of students already in university on in-state tuition whom, if it went away, they would be stuck and have to drop out.
Well, give us a little bit more background on DACA and what that all means, the context of it.
Okay. It stands for Deferred
Action,
Thank you
as
very
I
much.
recall.
Right, and
I think it's for childhood arrivals.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yep. And what that means is that it affects someone who's been brought over here by their parents who are not documented, and that child, that infant, is not documented either, but they've been here their whole lives and gone through our our K-12 system and been a vital part of the community and worked extremely hard for academic success. And those students, most of the time, come from families that live in poverty, so higher education is not necessarily easily accessible by them. And the idea of in-state tuition, they've lived in Virginia, and they're going to continue to live in Virginia. We want to keep that talent here. I don't know if your experience is the same as mine, but when anybody goes to graduate school in a different state, they pretty much stay there. That's where they've built their network, so to speak. So it's important to keep those talented students here and also to protect their access to education.
And I guess it's even more important given the recent election at the federal level and what's
Yes.
going on in Washington now.
I agree with you, and so many students in that category are afraid, very, very afraid. And I'm sure you know that as time goes by, we have more and more families where immigration status is completely mixed, so any one person who is scheduled for deportation really causes such turmoil for many, many people. And even the students that I know of who are here legally, they're afraid too.
Well, give us an idea of the demographic makeup of your district.
My district is wonderfully diverse. The high school, Jeb Stuart High School, that's in my backyard, has the widest income range of any high school in the nation, and those students speak more than 50 languages. So it's an incredible United Nations, so to speak. And I have always enjoyed working with that microcosm of the world in my backyard. So all of these issues that I bring up are in fact related to people in my district, many of them who at this time can't vote.
Now, what about the economic wherewithal of your district? We know that since 2007, 2008, the Commonwealth is still suffering from a lack of revenue given sequestration and other matters. How has your district fared?
My district has seen a slight comeback since the housing bust, and that's good for everyone at all levels. But in general, revenues are down because of sequestration. And so many people in my area, in my district, used to have contracts with the federal government that they don't have anymore. So we're working hard to have encourage small business and a lot of telework. As a matter of fact, one of my constituents got in touch with me. He's going to build a boutique distillery.
A boutique distillery?
Yes, I think
Wow.
he's focusing on vodka in the Falls Church area. And he asked me if I could help him have the ability to have people taste and purchase on site. So that has developed into a bipartisan bill, which so far has made it out of subcommittee, because apparently there are others who would like to start this kind of venture as well. So we're getting a lot of pop-up clever people trying to make their own way and be their own bosses. And I think that our academic system in Fairfax County, all the way up through George Mason, is focused on helping people do that too.
And of course, you came to the General Assembly from the school board.
Yes.
The governor said the General Assembly will hold K through 12 harmless, but that's based upon what, 2007, 2008, 2009 levels. It's $1 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but we're still not funded at the level we need to be.
No, we're not. And I know the governor is a brick wall, so to speak, about K-12 education funding and other education funding as well. But it's extremely difficult. I think we will be able to hold K-12, hold them harmless. But I, for example, just presented a budget amendment about LEP, limited English proficiency students, and changing the ratio of teacher to students in those classrooms. That is in the code. Right now, it's roughly one teacher to about 70 students.
1 to 70.
Yeah, and that doesn't even talk about what language you're talking about. And so in a place like my district, it's very difficult. So I'm trying to increase the ratio a little, and I did not meet with much positive response when I presented the budget amendment.
Now, there were a lot of visitors here over the last few days, especially I think a number of teachers were here. They're very
Yes.
disappointed, along with other state employees, of course, because with the deficit the Commonwealth has, it appears that there won't be a teacher raise. The governor suggested a one-time bonus.
Yeah.
That can't sit well with you and your constituents, especially those state employees.
No, it doesn't, and I understand the budgetary constraints that the governor's trying to work with and the balancing act that he's trying to achieve between his most favored pieces of legislation and this being his last year. But it is extremely difficult, and in my area, especially, but in Fairfax County all around, we are losing teachers. We train them, and then they go even next door to Arlington, where their benefits and salary are much higher. It's a real problem. I hope there is a way to at least give them that one-time bonus, but then we'll be stuck again for next year. A demonstration of the problem is that when I first started on the school board in Fairfax County about 17 years ago, oh my God, saying 17 years ago, we used to have applicants lined up, around the corner to teach in Fairfax County. Now we're having trouble filling vacancies, and we have some unfilled positions. It's a huge difference, and our school system numbers are growing statewide,
Sure.
as well as the students who live in poverty. The number of poverty ones, impoverished ones, and limited English proficiency. We need a major reevaluation of the way we fund education here.
Well, that's interesting because obviously the cost of living is higher in Fairfax compared to other parts of the state,
Yeah.
and that local composite index formula is supposed to assist in that regard, is it not?
It is supposed to assist in that regard, but several years ago, 5, maybe 6, it became prey to political partisanship, and the General Assembly started voting on the formula. And were we going to evaluate? It's supposed to be reevaluated
Right.
on a regular basis, blah, blah. But we decided it was something to vote on, and ever since then, it's not really reflected its original purpose.
I understand in the critical area of law enforcement, there is a real drain. It used to be that the state police paid more than local jurisdictions, but now in many places around the state it's just the opposite. So there are a lot of people who are working for the state police now are going to local jurisdictions, and it's
Right.
really hurting our state police.
It is, and it's a budget problem too. You know, once you put all the money and effort into training somebody and then they leave, even for a field that is quite similar next door but a different employer, the original training employer has really lost. I mean, that's the issue with the teachers as well, and we are also having a real problem with correction officers along those same lines.
Now you have some legislation dealing specifically with school boards and their ability to test for lead in the water.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And this is not, testing lead in the water in school buildings is not at all related to the problem in Flint, Michigan. Everybody I talk to about it assumes that's the
Right.
same. It's not. It means to test inside the school. It means to test the water that comes through the plumbing into the school, not the outside source. Pretty much across the Commonwealth, we have great outside source water, water authority water, but we have a lot of aging school buildings, and many of them were built before 1978, so there's lead in the pipes, and that's where the testing needs to happen. Arlington County has tested every single school building. They had one problem and they remediated it. Fairfax has just begun to test, and they did have one problem and remediated it. So I think it's extremely important. You know the effect that lead can have on a young child's brain, and you don't need a big dose.
Speaking of things that have an effect on young child's brains,
Yeah.
how are we doing in terms of mitigating those dreaded standards of learning tests?
I think we're doing pretty well. I would like to see a lot more change more quickly, because I think that while the standards make sense and they came from a drive for excellence in education, they have really become a burden, and they don't help learning in the classroom, and they prevent a lot of hands-on learning that I'd like to see. So I appreciate the efforts that the General Assembly and the governor have made, but we have a lot farther to go.
Now, one of the positive aspects of the governor's State of the Commonwealth address a couple of weeks ago now was his mention of an industry in cybersecurity and how high school kids with certification can get jobs that start at $80,000 a year.
Yes, he has said that around the Commonwealth, and it looks like we're getting a slow response, but steady response from higher ed. K-12 right now, honestly, most of the school systems don't have the time in their curriculum of all the things that we require them to do to have any requirement like that, but there are more coding offerings going on in
Yes.
the high schools. But the community colleges really are where that should be. And you may know that George Mason has had a relatively new partnership with Northern Virginia Community College to have even closer relationships about course content and transfer, and that's one area they're working on.
So there's still the 2+2 program with reference to our community colleges and institutions of higher learning. And are there still the tuition assistance grants that are available to students?
Yes, they have not been reevaluated and increased the way I think they should, but that is still available. And there are a number of private scholarship efforts as well. I myself have started a scholarship fund for my high school, but it's so important. I'm back to DACA.
Sure.
Because
sure.
in-state tuition, for example, at Northern Virginia Community College is about a third of what out-of-state tuition is. So if you don't have in-state tuition, you need 3 times as many scholarships. We need to be cognizant about that and be sure that our training is affordably priced and that the students who really need it and need to get out into the world and make a living can do that.
Well, what about at our institutions of higher learning? You know, there's been significant increase in tuition at our major universities, and I think there's $300 million in student debt here in the Commonwealth alone. How can we deal with that increased cost of tuition for in-state residents?
Well, I have a philosophical difference with many other members of the General Assembly about funding higher education. I think that since the amount of money the state gives to our higher ed colleges and universities has become so small over the past 10 years that we should not be as dictatorial as we are about their policies and ways that they want to raise money. There are a number of efforts and some pieces of legislation, and the governor is interested too, in developing a mechanism whereby the state can help some students who are so deeply in debt get rid of some of that debt, sort of wash it clean, at least for colleges and universities in Virginia. But that is a major undertaking, and I don't think it can happen anytime soon.
Sure. Talk to us about gender issues. You've been a leader ever since you've been here and before on those issues. They continue to crop up. I know there's some attempts, for example, to repeal, the sonogram legislation of some years ago. So give us the lay of the land.
Okay. Well, one thing that's really good is that this year there are more positive bills in that are directed at women's health care than ever since I've been in the legislature. And I take that as a real good sign. But the major areas that are a problem for women's health care, and by the way, I chair a caucus in the House with Senator Favola, who is the Senate chair, and we meet once a week to go over these issues. We still are back to a lot of basic things. You know, informed consent for abortion, which sounds reasonable, but in fact it's a rather grilling and shaming type of mechanism that women have to go through, trying to defund Planned Parenthood, and that would deny a lot of low-income women all sorts of access to health care. And the regulations...
Those regulations in terms of the clinics?
Yeah. Those actually, as you probably know, the State Board of Health decided they did not have to apply to any facility that or offered an abortion, basically Planned Parenthood. But I know that there are a significant number of folks who don't like that decision and are planning lawsuits. So this year I have a bill in, hopefully proactively, to protect the decision that the State Board made and to say that those do not relate to the way we do business in Virginia.
Well, I think you may have some good support for that, because as I recall it, at least in terms of what the state of Texas did with similar rules and regulations, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that that was an undue burden on the right of a woman to have an abortion.
Yes, yes. And I hope that that support will be there. I would really not like to be part of a lawsuit. There are a wide range of women's health issues, and most of the gender issues that you're referring to when you talk about women's needs are, in fact, health care needs. But there are other gender issues. I have the same billing I had last year, and anyway, many people care about equality in the workplace and outlawing discrimination on every level, not just the few that are enumerated in our code right now. So still working towards that, and spent some time with the Code Commission and General Laws between sessions, and I'm 2% more hopeful. So there are a lot of efforts being made to improve Virginians' place in the world, in the state, and to give Virginians what they deserve. I hope that we're able to have some success this year. In McAuliffe's last year.
Yes, that's true, and it appears that in his last year he's not going to be any more successful than he was the past 3 years in terms of Medicaid expansion.
No. But he will, he has renewed his promise that he will be a brick wall for women's health care issues, and that is very important and good to know, although I wish we could get there as a General Assembly on our own without the brick wall. Medicaid expansion is a real problem. I think that the fact that we have not implemented that, and now there's turmoil at the federal level, that a lot of people in Virginia, I don't know numbers yet, will lose health care altogether, or at least have severely diminished plans. All the providers, are, as you know, are very worried.
Talk to us a little bit about this move towards more transparency in the General Assembly, especially on the House side. I know one of your colleagues, Mark Levine, has partnered with Senator Amanda Chase to form a transparency caucus. They started last year, I believe, filming the bills they were working on in various committees. There's a nonprofit organization supplementing that this year.
Yes.
So talk to us about how you see that working out, and ultimately with a new building.
I believe that we will have a hugely enhanced ability to stream activities at all the different levels in the legislature in the new building. But that's a long way away, and there are things that we can do right now. And I am happy that we have that caucus. There is such a desire for transparency, and we have made it, the Speaker has made a few rules that help. No longer can you have an immediate meeting at someone's desk after session. You have to have a certain number of notice before a bill can be heard so that it's not a shock to everyone who would like to come and support it. But I think in Virginia, we have a lot of problems in terms of transparency, which has become a cliched word. One effort that I've been making, now it's almost 2 years, is about public comment. I believe that our citizens should be able to comment when they are at a public meeting held by public officials. And that might sound very reasonable, but it does not always happen, and it's not in our FOIA laws. So,
That's Freedom of Information Act.
Right.
Matters.
It's not in that. And this year I have a version of that bill, and I'm getting backing from both sides of the aisle. So I'm hoping that we can at least put this right to speak in public to your public officials in the code. So everybody out there who cares about that, send me an email.
Absolutely. Now, why is it so important that there be a recorded vote here in the House, for example, in subcommittee? I mean, I guess because it's such a critical stage of the legislative process.
Yeah,
and it
good
usually
point.
happens very early in the morning, as I understand it.
A lot of times it's very early in the morning. Yes, it is. I think it's very important because, as you say, the subcommittees are really the gateway. And if a bill doesn't make it out of subcommittee, it doesn't go anywhere. And the subcommittees are often very small, 4 people, 7 people. So it's crucial that, you know, constituents get a sense of what their representatives are doing. However, I don't think that's a very popular notion right now here in Richmond.
Temporary driver's licenses. I know you have some legislation dealing with that issue.
I do, and thank you for bringing that up. we had a long, long study, intense study that the DMV headed between sessions about driving privileges for legal immigrants, because there are quite a few categories of legal immigrants, like asylum seekers, who are not allowed to drive in Virginia. And also looking at the pros and cons of driving privileges for undocumented citizens. The DMV did a great job of pulling together every group you could possibly imagine. And they recommended, without any caveats, that every legal immigrant in Virginia should have driving privileges. That's the bill that I have in. But they also were recommending a number of efforts that would lead to undocumented people being able to drive. They looked at the safety issues, the cost issues. Anyway, it's a magnificent piece of work, and I think that we might be able to at least include all the legal immigrants in our driving public, and that's one more step towards fairness and involvement in the marketplace that is out in the sunshine, so to speak, and safety.
Do you have any concerns about the influence now of Washington on those kinds of issues?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. This summer, when the work group was working, the air was much more positive and optimistic than it is now. And I think that the new administration is not going to be a friend of this sort of movement. So I'm hoping that at least this session we can include legal immigrants in those who can be granted driving privileges, and that will at least help a few people.
Great. Transportation, as always, is a big issue in Northern Virginia. We've got about a minute left, but why don't you talk a little bit about the work of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, especially as they work through the criteria. It's HB2, has nothing to do with North Carolina, of course,
Yes.
but the criteria that was established to determine where funding will go.
I appreciate their work, and I agree with most of the decisions that they're making, and I think they're in a tough place. But they don't have public meetings. They don't allow public comment at any of their meetings, and they're required to meet 6 times a year, and that's not very often, and I think they ought to allow a public comment period on something so important at their regular meetings.
Well, great. We'll leave it at that. We're so pleased that you're able to spend time with us today.
Thank
Delegate
you for
Kaye,
the
Kory.
opportunity. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.